Good afternoon, you guys. We are here. We're going to discuss succession today. So you'll need to have out your notebook and you're going to need to take a few notes. Remember that in high school, when we're taking notes on topics, it's best to write down vocabulary words and examples. And then later on, when you're studying, you can highlight those definitions. You can go ahead and put them on flashcards in order to help you with the vocabulary. Maybe you want to use an app like Quizlet. It's also a good idea to maybe read the textbook about this topic and then add any extra information from the textbook that you read onto the notes that you took from this video. So that's a great study technique if you're looking to have a higher grade second semester than you had first semester. So succession is a series of predictable changes in the types of species that occur in a community over time. So the first thing we want to write down is succession. Maybe you want to underline that or highlight that. And it's a series of predictable changes in the types of species that occur in a community over time. So what we're saying is that over time, the community is going to change and there's going to be different types of plants and different types of animals. The first type of succession that we want to talk about is primary succession. So you might want to draw two little arrows or make a little T-chart and separate into primary and secondary. And then you can pause the video, you can catch up your notes, press play when you're ready to hear more. But primary succession is when there's no soil available. This typically happens with volcanoes erupting or after flooding or after glaciers. And so what we have are pioneers. So like think about people moving out west in the 1700s, 1800s. So we have pioneer species that come in. These are usually things like lichens, and you can see a picture of the lichen on the slide. So these are things like lichens or mosses that come in first. When they do that, they begin to break down the rock. Remember that there's no soil presence. They begin to break down the rock. They actually secrete an acid that's going to break down the rock. They die, they decompose, and they add nutrients. And then over time, as they do this, over hundreds of years, then soil begins to form and other plants can move in. When the plants begin to move in, then remember we have birds move in, insects move in, and then mammals move in. Secondary succession, on the other hand, already has soil present. So if we go back to our T-chart, we have on our primary succession, we should have no soil. Maybe you put down that it happens from volcanoes or from glaciers melting. And then it starts with pioneer species, and then bigger species move in. In secondary succession, soil is already present. And with that, it happens a little bit faster. So maybe under primary succession, you write down slow. Under secondary succession, you're going to write down faster. So that's because the pioneer species are already there, or it's really easy for them to come in because that soil is already present. And so as you see here, we have a few soon shrubs, and then grasses move in, and then smaller trees like pine forests, and then mature trees like oak trees begin to grow. At the very end of succession, we have what we call a climax community. This means that the ecosystem is fully developed. There's lots and lots of plants there. There's lots and lots of animals there. It may include big trees if you live in an area that has a forest, or if you live in places like Nebraska or Kansas that are like a grassland, you won't see any trees, but you'll see lots and lots and lots of grass. And that's considered a climax community in that area. One important thing to realize is that these climax communities have a lot of biodiversity, meaning they have lots of different types of plants and animals, and that makes them very resilient. That means they're resistant to change, or they can kind of come back if something happens to them, if a disease or a natural disaster comes in, they're more resilient. They can respond better. If you look at this picture, right? If you're in stages maybe 4 years after cultivation or 5 years after cultivation, you're still in that early stage of succession, you're not very resilient, meaning that like if something comes in, those species are going to be pretty much wiped out. Climax communities have high levels of biodiversity, so they're very resilient. If a disease comes in, they're going to be able to fight it off. If a human accidentally introduces an invasive species, because there's so many other plants and animals, each of which occupies its different niche or its different job, there's not enough resources or other jobs for these invasive species to come in and take hold. And so we say that it's resilient, and resiliency is related to biodiversity. So these climax communities have so many plants and animals that it's really easy for them to respond to changes. If the climate begins to change and get warmer, they're more likely to survive because they have so much biodiversity. So it's something important that we need to keep in mind, and you may want to make a little note in your notes. Okay. So in your notes, you might also want to add one area where somebody might misunderstand ecological succession is, and in order to clear up that misunderstanding, here's what I would tell them. So I hope that this was helpful for you. You will have an additional assignment over succession to help you practice the ideas that you learned today.